I learned how to smile before I learned how to feel safe. And that's the kind of skill no one congratulates you for. Especially when your reflection still looks like someone who should have known better, the bathroom light above me flickering as water ran in a steady stream, drowning out the quiet in my apartment. I pressed my fingers lightly against my side, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind myself where the fabric of my life had started to thin. Then I pulled my shirt down, adjusted the collar, and practiced again, softer this time, more believable, the kind of smile that didn't ask questions, the kind that made people comfortable enough not to look too closely. By the time I stepped out into the cold night air, I was ready, or at least I looked ready, which was usually enough. The restaurant glowed like a different world behind glass windows, warm lights, soft music, people laughing like nothing bad had ever touched them. I tied my apron tighter than necessary, grounding myself in routine, in something predictable, something I could control. Emily, table 12, my manager called, and I nodded, keeping my head down, keeping everything contained, because that's what you do when your life depends on staying unnoticed. The first hour passed like it always did. Orders, refills, polite smiles, small talk that meant nothing, until the air shifted. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, just a quiet kind of change that made people straighten without realizing why. Conversations softened, eyes moved, and I felt it before I saw him. The kind of presence that didn't ask for attention but took it anyway. Adrian Volkov stepped inside like the room already belonged to him. Dark coat, tailored perfectly, every movement controlled, precise, like he had nothing to prove and everything to protect. I had heard the name before, everyone had, but names didn't matter to me. Not when I was focused on surviving the next 5 minutes. I picked up a tray, steady hands, steady breath. But something in me hesitated when I looked up and found his eyes already on me. Not scanning, not passing over, locked, like he had been waiting, like I had walked into his line of sight without realizing it. And for a second, just one, I forgot how to move. Then I broke the gaze, because that's what you do. You don't invite attention from men like that. You don't become memorable. I moved toward the table, repeating the same lines I always did, voice calm, professional, invisible, but I could feel it, the way his attention followed, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just present, like a question that hadn't been asked yet. I set the glasses down carefully, turned too fast, and that's when it happened. The tray tilted, not enough to fall, just enough to make me react, my sleeve slipping back an inch. Maybe two, but it was enough. It always is. Time didn't slow. It sharpened, every detail too clear, the cool air against my skin, the faint sound of glass settling, and his eyes dropping, not to my face, not to my hands, but to the place I had spent so long learning to hide. I pulled my sleeve down immediately, too quickly, which only made it obvious. My heart picked up, not panic, not yet, just that familiar tightening. The calculation. Did he see? Did it matter? Would he forget? Most people do. Most people choose to. But when I looked back up, he wasn't looking away. There was no confusion in his expression, no curiosity, just recognition, like he understood something without needing it explained. And that was worse, because recognition meant attention, and attention meant change. I forced a smile, the practiced one, the safe one. Can I get you anything else? My voice steady, controlled, but it felt thin under the weight of his silence. He didn't answer right away, just watched me for a second longer than normal, long enough to make the world around us fade into background noise. Then finally, quietly, "You already did," he said, and I didn't understand what that meant. Not then, not yet, but something in the way he said it made the back of my neck prickle, like a door had just opened somewhere I couldn't see. I stepped back, creating distance, because distance was safety, distance was control. But as I turned away, I knew, without looking, that this wasn't over. Because men like him didn't notice things by accident, and they didn't forget them either. I told myself it meant nothing, that the way he looked at me was just curiosity, just another rich man noticing something unusual for a second before moving on, because that is what people do, they see. Just enough to satisfy their interest, and then they forget. But I felt it anyway, the shift, like something invisible had tilted slightly out of place. And no matter how many times I repeated the same routine, refill, smile, step back, I could not shake the awareness of him still sitting there, still watching, Not constantly, not obviously, but enough that every time I turned, my chest tightened before I could stop it. I avoided that section as much as I could, switching tables with another server under the excuse of being busy, keeping my head down, counting minutes instead of seconds. But even distance did not feel like distance. Not when I could still feel that quiet kind of attention lingering somewhere behind me. The kind that did not demand anything yet somehow took everything. By the time his table finished, I was in the kitchen, hands braced against the stainless steel counter, breathing slower than I felt. Maria glanced at me, raising an eyebrow, but I shook my head before she could ask, because I did not have an answer that would make sense, not without sounding like I was imagining things. And maybe I was. Maybe exhaustion had started to blur the edges of reality. That would be easier to accept, easier than believing someone like him had noticed someone like me. Emily, my manager called again, softer this time. Careful, they left this for you. I turned, wiping my hands on my apron, and saw the card before I saw his face in my memory. Black, simple, no unnecessary details, just a name and a number pressed into thick paper that felt heavier than it should. I did not touch it right away, just stared at it like it might disappear if I waited long enough. You know who that is, right? Maria whispered, leaning closer, her voice barely audible over the hum of the kitchen. I nodded once, because of course I knew. Everyone knew. But knowing a name and understanding what it meant were two very different things. I picked up the card finally, sliding it into my pocket without looking at it again, like that would somehow make it less real, less important, like it would not follow me home. The rest of the shift blurred together. Movements automatic, voice steady, smile practiced. Until the clock finally pushed past midnight and the restaurant began to empty, chairs stacked, lights dimmed, the kind of quiet that settles after everything has already happened. I changed quickly, pulling my jacket on, checking my reflection one last time in the darkened glass of the front door. Everything in place, nothing visible, exactly how it should be. Outside, the air had turned colder, sharp enough to wake me up, my breath visible with every step as I walked toward the parking lot. Keys already in my hand. The familiar routine grounding me again. Until I heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of one. The kind of stillness that makes you aware of everything at once. I slowed. Just slightly. Telling myself not to look, not to react. But instinct is louder than logic sometimes. And I turned. Just enough to check. Just enough to confirm. And there he was. Not close. Not threatening. Just standing there near the edge of the lot like he had been there the entire time. Like he had nowhere else to be. My grip tightened around my keys. Not fear. Not exactly. More like uncertainty. Because nothing about him felt rushed or aggressive. If anything, it was the opposite. Controlled. Deliberate. Like every step he took had already been decided long before this moment. He did not move closer right away. Just watched me the same way he had inside. Calm. Unreadable. And somehow that was worse. Because it meant he did not need to chase. Did not need to force anything. He already had my attention. You should not walk out here alone. His voice carried across the space between us, low, even, like a statement instead of a warning. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, forcing my shoulders to stay relaxed. I do it every night. I replied, my voice steady enough to convince myself. If not him, he tilted his head slightly, like he was considering that, weighing it against something I could not see, then took a step forward, slow, measured, not closing the distance completely, just enough to make the conversation feel real. That does not make it safe, he said, and there was something in the way he said safe that made it sound unfamiliar, like a concept he did not use often but understood perfectly. I hesitated, unsure what the right response was, because this was not how these interactions were supposed to go. There was no demand, no pressure, just presence, and that made it harder to navigate, harder to predict. I am fine, I said finally, defaulting to the simplest answer, the one I always used. But his eyes dropped again, not to my face this time, but lower, to where my jacket did not quite cover everything it should, and I realized too late that I had been careless, that in trying to move quickly, I had missed something. His expression did not change much, but I saw it again, that same shift from earlier, quieter this time, deeper, like something settling into place instead of breaking. No, he said softly, almost to himself, you are not And before I could respond, before I could step back or turn away, he reached into his coat, not quickly, not suddenly, and pulled something out, holding it toward me without stepping closer, a second card, identical to the first. Keep it, he added, his gaze steady on mine. In case you decide. You are tired of pretending. The words landed heavier than they should have, not because of what they said, but because of how easily he had seen through everything I had worked to hide. I did not take the card right away, my hand hovering in the space between us, caught between instinct and something else I could not name. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen, completely. And that terrified me more than anything else. I should have walked away. That was the first thought that came to me as I stood there with his hand still extended, and that second card waiting between us like a decision I was not ready to make, because taking it would mean something, even if I could not define what. Even if I told myself it was just a piece of paper, just a number, just another option I would never use. But options have weight when you have been living without them for too long. I forced my hand to move, slow, controlled, taking the card without letting my fingers brush his, a small distance, a small boundary, but it mattered, at least to me. I slipped it into my pocket next to the first one, the edges pressing lightly against my hip like a reminder I could not ignore. Thank you, I said. The words automatic, polite, the kind you use when you do not know what else to say. He nodded once, like that was enough, like he did not expect anything more, and that unsettled me more than if he had asked for something in return, because people like him always asked for something. That is how the world worked. Exchange, leverage, control. But there was none of that in his expression, just that same quiet certainty, like he had already done what he needed to do. Good night, Emily, he said. And the way he said my name made my chest tighten, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it sounded like he understood it, like it belonged in his voice in a way it should not. I frowned slightly, confusion slipping through before I could hide it. I do not remember telling you my name, I replied, and for a moment, something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes, brief, controlled. You did not, he said simply, and that was it. No explanation, no apology, just a statement that settled into the space between us like something inevitable. I swallowed, reminding myself to breathe, to stay grounded, because this was not normal. None of this was normal, and I needed to keep my head clear. I should go, I added, taking a step back, creating distance again, and this time he did not follow, did not stop me. He just watched as I turned. As I walked toward my car with steady steps that felt heavier than usual, my senses sharper, more aware, like something had shifted inside me, and I could not push it back into place. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and only then did I allow myself to exhale fully, my hands resting on the steering wheel, fingers trembling just slightly before I forced them still. I stared straight ahead for a few seconds, then glanced in the mirror, half expecting him to be gone, but he was still there, standing exactly where I left him, not approaching, not leaving, just watching, and, for some reason, that steadiness unsettled me more than anything else could have. I started the engine, the familiar sound grounding me again, giving me something to focus on, something normal. I pulled out of the parking spot slowly, deliberately. And as I drove past him, I kept my eyes forward, resisting the urge to look, because looking would mean acknowledging something I was not ready to face. The drive home felt longer than usual, every streetlight casting shadows that shifted too quickly, every passing car making me check the mirrors more often than I needed to. Not because I thought I was being followed, but because the awareness of him lingered, like a presence that did not require proximity to exist. By the time I reached my apartment building, my shoulders ached from tension I had not realized I was holding. I parked, gathered my things, and stepped out into the quiet, the kind of quiet that usually comforted me. But tonight it felt different, thinner, like something was missing, or maybe something had been added. I could not tell which. I climbed the stairs to my unit, each step measured, routine guiding me again. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. I leaned back against it for a moment, eyes closing, letting the stillness settle around me. This was my space, small, simple, predictable, everything exactly where I left it, everything under control. I pushed away from the door, moving through the apartment with familiar motions, setting my keys down, placing my bag on the chair, but my hand paused when it reached my pocket, the cards still there. I pulled them out slowly, placing them on the table in front of me, two identical pieces of black paper, two identical choices. I stared at them for a long moment, my reflection faintly visible in the glossy surface, distorted, uncertain. In case you decide you are tired of pretending. His words echoed in my mind, quiet but persistent. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly, because that was not true. I was not pretending. I was surviving. There was a difference. There had to be. I reached for the light switch, flicking it off, letting the room fall into darkness. Easier to think that way, easier not to see things too clearly. But even in the dark, I could feel the weight of those cards on the table, like they were still visible, like they were waiting, and for the first time in a long time, I did not know which choice would keep me safer, ignoring them, or using them. The silence in my apartment did not feel like silence anymore. It felt like something waiting, like the air itself had shifted and was holding its breath with me. I stood there in the dark longer than I meant to, staring at nothing and yet feeling everything. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing outside, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, all of it too loud, too sharp, like my senses had decided to stop protecting me. I reached for the table again, my fingers brushing the edge before finding the cards, smooth, cold, real. I picked one up, turning it between my fingers, tracing the embossed letters without looking, as if memorizing them would somehow make the decision easier. But it did not. It only made it heavier, because now it was not just a thought. It was a possibility, and possibilities change things, even when you do not act on them. I set the card back down, stepping away like distance could weaken its pull, moving toward the small kitchen instead, filling a glass with water just to have something to do, something normal. I took a sip, then another, focusing on the simple act of swallowing, grounding myself in something that made sense, because nothing about tonight made sense. Not the way he looked at me, not the way he spoke, not the way he knew things he should not know. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes briefly, and that was when I heard it. The sound of a key in the lock, soft, familiar, but wrong in this moment. My eyes snapped open, my body going still before I could think, before I could prepare. The door opened slowly, and the light from the hallway spilled into the apartment, cutting through the darkness in a sharp line. Emily. His voice came first, casual, almost tired, like nothing was out of place, like everything was exactly as it should be. I set the glass down carefully, too carefully, every movement controlled as I turned to face him. "You are home early," he added, stepping inside and closing the door behind him, the click echoing louder than it should have. I forced a small smile, the practiced one, the safe one, the one that had gotten me through everything else. My shift ended sooner. I replied, keeping my tone even, steady, predictable. He nodded, dropping his keys onto the table, the same table where the cards sat, and for a split second, my heart stuttered, but his attention did not go there. Not yet. He moved past me, heading toward the living room like he always did, like this was routine, like there was nothing unusual about tonight, and maybe for him, there was not. Maybe nothing had changed on his side of the world. I watched him carefully, subtle, controlled, noting the way his shoulders were tense, the way his movements were just slightly sharper than usual, small details that most people would miss. But I had learned to notice everything, because noticing kept me prepared, and being prepared kept me safe. "Long day?" I asked, filling the silence before it could turn into something else, something heavier. He shrugged, loosening his jacket. "Same as always," he said. But there was something under his voice, something tight, like a thread pulled too far. He turned toward me then, his eyes scanning my face briefly, searching, measuring, and I held still, letting him see exactly what I wanted him to see. Nothing more, nothing less. "You look tired," he added, stepping closer, not fast, not aggressive, just enough to shift the space between us. I nodded slightly, stepping back in the same motion, maintaining distance without making it obvious. "Just work," I said, and for a moment, that seemed to be enough. His gaze lingered a second longer, then moved past me, toward the table, toward the place I had forgotten to protect. I followed his line of sight too late, my breath catching just slightly as his eyes settled on the black cards resting against the wood. The room went still, the kind of Stillness that stretches seconds into something longer, something heavier. He did not reach for them right away. Just looked, his expression unreadable, but I felt the shift, subtle but undeniable, like something had just changed direction. "What is that?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now, not casual anymore. I swallowed, stepping forward, my hand moving instinctively toward the table, but stopping just short. "Nothing important," I said, keeping my tone light, dismissive, like it did not matter, like it was just another object in a room full of unimportant things. But he did not look away, his gaze fixed on the cards like they had already told him everything he needed to know. He reached out then, slow, deliberate, picking one up between his fingers, turning it slightly, reading the name without saying it out loud. And I saw it. The exact moment something clicked behind his eyes, not confusion, not curiosity, recognition, the same kind I had seen earlier that night, but different now, sharper, more focused. "Where did you get this?" he asked, and this time the question was not casual, it was careful, controlled, like he was choosing each word with precision. I hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough for him to notice, enough for the air between us to tighten. "Someone left it at the restaurant," I replied, the truth simplified, stripped of anything that might matter. But his eyes lifted from the card to my face, searching again, deeper this time, like he was trying to see past the version of me I showed the world. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not exactly. Something else, something quieter but more dangerous. The realization that this moment, this small, simple question, was not small at all. It was the beginning of something I could not control. Something that had already started the second Adrian Volkov looked at me and decided I was no longer invisible. There are moments when silence says more than words ever could, and the way he held that card between his fingers told me everything I needed to know. He knew the name, not just recognized it, but understood what came with it, the weight, the implications, the kind of attention it carried. His eyes did not leave mine this time, steady, searching, like he was recalculating something in real time. "That is not the kind of thing people just leave behind," he said quietly, his voice controlled but no longer casual, and I felt it again, that tightening in the air, that invisible shift that meant something had changed. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my expression neutral, because reacting would only give him more, and I had already given too much without meaning to. "It was just a customer," I replied, keeping my tone even, simple, like it was nothing more than a routine interaction. But even as I said it, I knew he would not accept that, not completely. Not when the name on that card carried more weight than an explanation like mine could cover. He glanced down at it again, turning it slightly, like he was confirming something he already suspected, then set it back on the table with deliberate care, not dismissive, not careless, but controlled, like he was placing a piece in a game that had just begun. "You should not keep things like that," he said, and this time it sounded less like advice and more like a warning. Not loud, not forceful, just certain. I let out a small breath, crossing my arms loosely, a gesture that looked casual but felt like protection. "It is just a phone number," I said, but the words felt thin even to me, like they did not hold the truth they were supposed to carry. His gaze sharpened slightly, not angry, not accusing, just focused. "No," he said, shaking his head once, slow, measured. "It is not." And for a second, I did not know what to say, because part of me knew he was right, even if I did not fully understand why. Even if I did not want to admit it. I looked down at the cards again, their dark surface reflecting a faint outline of the room, distorted, unclear, like everything else tonight. "I was not going to use it," I added, quieter this time, more honest than I intended, and something in his expression shifted at that. Not relief, not approval. Something more complicated, like he was weighing that statement against something else, something I could not see. He stepped closer then, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to close the space between us slightly, and I held my ground, not stepping back this time, not giving him that distance, because I needed to understand what this was, what this meant. "If someone like him gives you a number," he said, his voice lower now, more deliberate, "it means he has already decided something about you." The words settled heavily, not because they were loud, but because they were precise. I felt my fingers tighten slightly against my arms, my mind replaying that moment in the parking lot. The way Adrian had looked at me, the way he had said my name like it belonged in his voice. And what does that mean? I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out softer than I intended. But it was real. It mattered. He watched me for a moment, longer than usual, like he was deciding how much to say, how much I could handle. It means he will not forget you, he answered finally, and something in my chest shifted at that. Not fear, not exactly, something deeper, something that felt like the beginning of a realization I was not ready for. I looked away first, breaking the connection, because holding it felt too intense, too exposing. I moved toward the table, picking up the cards again, stacking them together like that would make them easier to ignore, easier to control, but they still felt heavy in my hand, heavier than paper should feel. Then I will just forget him, I said, more to myself than to him. But he heard it anyway. I could tell by the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes followed my movement. It does not work like that, he replied quietly, and there was something in his tone that made me pause, something that sounded like experience, like certainty earned over time. I hesitated, then set the cards down again, this time closer to the edge of the table, like I might push them away completely if I tried hard enough. You are overthinking this, I added, trying to bring the conversation back to something normal, something manageable. But even as I said it, I knew that was not true. Not anymore. He did not respond right away, just watched me, studying, measuring, like he was trying to decide something important, something that involved both of us, and that made my pulse pick up again, not fast, not panicked, just enough to remind me that this moment mattered more than I wanted it to. Maybe, he said finally, his voice softer now, less sharp, but no less serious. Or maybe you are underestimating what you just stepped into. The words lingered between us, heavier than anything else he had said, and for the first time that night, I realized something I had been trying to avoid. This was not just about a card, or a name, or a single moment in a restaurant. This was something larger, something already in motion, and whether I liked it or not, I was already part of it. The worst part about realizing something is out of your control is not the fear. It is the clarity, the quiet understanding that no matter what you do next, the direction has already been set. And as I stood there across from him, watching the way his eyes stayed on me like he was trying to solve something I did not even know was a question, I felt that clarity settle in, heavy and unavoidable. I turned away first, because I needed space, needed distance from the way he was looking at me, from the weight of everything he had just said. I picked up the cards again, not because I wanted to, but because leaving them there felt worse, like ignoring them would somehow make things spiral further out of control. I walked toward the small drawer near the kitchen, the one where I kept things I did not want to think about, receipts, old notes, keys that no longer opened anything, and I slid the cards inside, closing it with a soft push, out of sight, out of reach, or at least that was the idea. There, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Problem solved. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow, like a temporary fix to something that was not temporary at all. He did not respond right away, and when I turned back, he was still watching me, but differently now, not just observing, not just calculating. Something else had settled into his expression, something more focused, more intentional. That does not solve anything, he said finally, his voice calm but firm. And I felt a flicker of frustration rise in my chest, not at him exactly, but at the situation, at the way everything seemed to be slipping into something I could not define. Then what do you want me to do? I asked, the question sharper than I intended, but I did not take it back. I could not, because I needed an answer, needed something concrete to hold on to. He took a step closer, closing the distance just slightly, and this time I did not move away. I held my ground, meeting his gaze directly, because if this was happening, if I was already part of it, then I needed to understand it, not avoid it. I want you to be careful, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made my breath catch, not because of the words themselves, but because of the intention behind them. It was not control, not possession. It was something else, something quieter but stronger, like a line being drawn without asking for permission. I looked at him for a moment, really looked this time, past the surface, past the tension in his shoulders and the sharpness in his gaze, searching for something that made sense. something I could trust, but all I found was certainty, unwavering and unyielding. I am always careful, I replied, softer now, because that part was true. It had to be. Being careful was how I had made it this far, how I had kept things together when everything else tried to pull them apart. But his expression did not change, did not soften. If anything, it grew more serious. No, he said quietly, shaking his head once. You are careful about the wrong things. The words hit differently, not loud, not harsh, but precise, like they landed exactly where they were meant to. I felt my chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, something closer to recognition, because part of me understood what he meant, even if I did not want to admit it. I looked away again, my gaze drifting toward the drawer where the cards now sat hidden, and for the first time, hiding them did not feel like control. It felt like denial, like pretending the situation did not exist when it very clearly did. He just gave me a number, I said after a moment, quieter now, more uncertain than before. It does not mean anything. But even as I said it, the memory of Adrian's eyes, the way he had said my name, the way he had looked at me like he had already decided something, pushed back against that statement, making it feel less certain, less real. He followed my gaze, his attention shifting briefly toward the drawer, then back to me, and I saw it again. That same calculation, that same quiet decision forming behind his eyes. It means something to him, he said, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just fact. I swallowed, my fingers curling slightly at my sides as I tried to process that, tried to fit it into something that made sense, but it did not. Not completely, not yet. And what does that mean for me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, softer than before, but heavier, more real. He held my gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching just enough to make my pulse pick up. Not fast, not panicked, just aware, like something important was about to be said, something that would shift everything again. It means you do not get to ignore this, he said finally, his voice low, steady. And something about the way he said it made it feel final, like a line had been crossed. Without me realizing it, I exhaled slowly, my shoulders relaxing just slightly, not because the tension was gone, but because I understood now. This was not something I could push aside, not something I could pretend was small or insignificant. It was already moving, already changing things, and whether I wanted it to or not, it had already reached me. I glanced toward the door, then back at him, my thoughts shifting, adjusting, trying to find a way forward. Then what happens now? I asked quietly, and for the first time since this conversation started, I saw something different in his expression, not just certainty, not just control, something else, something that felt like a decision being made in real time, something that involved me whether I agreed to it or not. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but somehow more certain. Now, he said, his eyes steady on mine. We make sure you stay out of his reach. And something about the way he said we made my breath catch, because it sounded like a promise, and promises like that always came with consequences. Promises are dangerous when they are made too easily, especially the kind that sound like protection but feel like control. And the moment he said we, something inside me reacted before I could stop it. Not fear exactly, but resistance, sharp and immediate, because I had spent too long depending on no one to suddenly become part of someone else's plan. I straightened slightly, my arms dropping from where they had been crossed. Not defensive anymore, just firm. I did not ask for that, I said, quietly, meeting his gaze without hesitation, because if this was going to continue, I needed him to understand that I was not something to be managed, not something to be moved around like a piece in whatever game he thought was happening. His expression did not change much, but I saw it, that brief flicker of acknowledgement, like he had expected that reaction, like he had already accounted for it. I know, he replied, calm, steady, like my refusal did not disrupt his certainty at all. And somehow that made it worse, because it meant this was not about permission, it was about decision, his decision, and I was already inside it. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay grounded, to think clearly instead of reacting. Then why are you acting like this is already decided? I asked, my voice controlled but firmer now. And for the first time, he paused, not long, just enough to shift the rhythm of the moment, his eyes holding mine as if measuring how much truth I could handle. Because he already made his move, he said, and the simplicity of that statement settled into the space between us with more weight than anything else he had said so far. I frowned slightly, my mind replaying everything from earlier. The card, the way Adrian had looked at me, the way he had spoken, and suddenly it did not feel like a random moment anymore. It felt intentional, like something had been set in motion long before I realized I was part of it. It was just a conversation, I said, but there was less certainty in my voice now, less conviction, because part of me was starting to see what he meant, starting to understand that nothing about that interaction had been casual. He shook his head slightly, not dismissive, just certain. Men like him do not have conversations like that without a reason, he replied, and I could not argue with that. Not completely. Not when I had felt it myself. That difference, that weight behind every word. I turned slightly, pacing a step away, then back again, my thoughts moving faster now, trying to catch up with everything that was unfolding. So what? I just stopped going to work, stopped living my life because someone decided to notice me. I asked, frustration slipping through now, sharper than before, because the idea of that, of changing everything because of one moment, felt wrong, felt unfair. He watched me closely, his expression still controlled, but there was something else there now, something that looked almost like understanding, like he knew exactly what I was pushing against. No, he said after a moment, his voice softer but no less firm. You keep living your life, but you stop pretending this does not matter. The words landed differently, not like an order, not like control, but like a boundary, something real that could not be ignored. I stopped moving, looking at him again, really looking this time, and for a second, I saw something I had not noticed before, not just control, not just certainty, but awareness, like he was not just reacting to the situation, he was anticipating it, already thinking steps ahead, already planning for something I could not yet see. And what exactly does that look like? I asked, quieter now, more measured, because I needed specifics, needed something I could understand. He took a small step closer, not closing the space completely, but enough to make the moment feel more direct, more focused. It looks like you do not walk home alone at midnight, he said, his tone even. It looks like you pay attention to who is around you, not just to avoid them, but to understand them. He paused briefly, then added, and it looks like you do not ignore the fact that someone like him now knows your name. My breath caught slightly at that, not from fear, but from the truth in it, because that part one could not deny, not anymore. I had seen it, felt it, and pretending otherwise was not going to change anything. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. The reality of the situation settling in piece by piece. Uncomfortable, but undeniable. Fine, I said after a moment, my voice steady again. I will be more aware. It was not agreement, not fully, but it was a step, a small acknowledgement that things had changed, that I needed to adjust. He studied me for a second longer, like he was deciding whether that was enough, whether I understood what I was agreeing to. Then finally, he nodded once, slow, deliberate, like he was accepting that answer for now. Good, he said quietly, and the way he said it made it sound like this was only the beginning, not the solution, just the first step. In something much larger, I glanced toward the drawer again, the cards hidden but not forgotten, and for the first time, I did not see them as something I could ignore. I saw them as a connection, a thread that had already been pulled, leading somewhere I could not yet see. And as I looked back at him, at the steady certainty in his eyes, I realized something I had not wanted to admit before. This was not just about avoiding someone. It was about understanding what had already started, and whether I was ready or not, I was going to have to face it. Sleep does not come easily when your mind refuses to stay quiet. And that night, mine replayed every detail like it was trying to solve something I did not fully understand yet. The way Adrian had looked at me, the way his voice had carried something unspoken, the way his presence lingered even after he was gone, and then the way the man in front of me now had reacted, not surprised, not confused, but certain, like he already knew how this would unfold. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling long. After the apartment had gone still, the faint glow of streetlights slipping through the blinds casting shifting lines across the walls, measuring time in silence instead of sleep, every sound sharper than usual, every thought louder, and somewhere between all of that, a realization began to settle in, quiet but persistent. I was no longer invisible, and that changed everything. Morning came slower than it should have. Or maybe I just noticed it more, the light creeping in gradually, pulling me out of a restless half-sleep that never quite became rest. I moved through my routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, clothes. Each step familiar but heavier, like I was carrying something I could not put down. The apartment felt smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted closer overnight. Or maybe it was just me, seeing things differently now. I paused at the table before leaving, my hand hovering over the drawer for a second longer than necessary, then opening it slowly, the cards still there, exactly where I left them, unchanged, but they did not feel the same anymore. They felt like a decision waiting to be made, not urgent, not immediate, but inevitable. I closed the drawer again without touching them, because I was not ready for that. Not yet. Outside, the air was crisp, colder than the night before, sharp enough to clear my head. Or at least that was the hope. I walked toward my car with steady steps, more aware of my surroundings than usual, noticing things I would have ignored before. The way a man stood too long on the corner, the way a car idled with its engine running a little too quietly, small details that might mean nothing, but now felt like something I needed to pay attention to. I reached the restaurant earlier than usual, the familiar routine grounding me again, the sound of voices, the clatter of dishes, the rhythm of movement pulling me back into something I understood, something I could control. Maria glanced at me as I tied my apron, her eyes narrowing slightly like she was trying to read something I was not saying. "You look different," she commented, not accusing, just observant. I forced a small smile, the practiced one. "Just tired," I replied. And she nodded like that was enough, because most people accept simple answers when they are given. The shift started like any other: orders, refills, movement, but there was something underneath it now, a quiet tension I could not quite shake, like I was waiting for something without knowing what. I caught myself checking the door more often than I should have, my eyes scanning the room without meaning to, searching for a presence I was not sure I wanted to find again. Hours passed, slow and steady, until the moment came without warning. The door opened, and I felt it before I saw him. That same shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. Conversations softening, attention shifting, and when I looked up, he was there, Adrian Volkov, moving through the space like it belonged to him, like he had never left. My breath caught for a fraction of a second, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, but this